Ted, I understand you just returned from Israel. What would you like to see come out of this call?
Well, I'm really glad that they're having the call. I think it's important for friends and allies to be able to communicate. This is a horrific tragedy. My heart goes out to the families of the workers who lost their lives. And Jose Andres is a hero. This is what he does around the world. I can't imagine the pain that he's feeling. I know during the conversation that they have, they will also talk about the fact that this conversation is happening because of this war that Hamas started on 10/7, because there are still hostages, over 130 hostages that are being held, including 6 Americans that I know that this White House is so committed to bringing home. And when I was in Israel, I spent time with survivors of the Nova Music Festival, where 3,500 people went to celebrate music, and over 350 were slaughtered, others taken hostage. And survivors of Kibbutz Be'eri, where 10% of their kibbutz, of their village, was slaughtered by Hamas. This is a really important moment. I'm glad the conversation is taking place, and I hope that it focuses on all of the ways that the administration will continue to stand with Israel to defeat Hamas, not only for the benefit of Israel and the people of Israel, but ultimately for the benefit of the United States, because these are the same people who are launching attacks against American troops, killing American troops. Iran supports Hamas. Iran supports the Houthis. That's all going to be part of this conversation, I'm sure, as well. But yes, this is a horrific tragedy, and our heart breaks. I think it has to for what happened, for the loss of life here.
And Courtney, you have new details about what is being described as a tense meeting between Israeli and American officials earlier this week?
Yeah, that's right, Jose. And I will say, the more that our colleague Carol Lee and I looked into this virtual meeting that took place on Monday between Israeli officials and Biden administration officials, the more that we learned that these meetings have become increasingly tense. But the one on Monday, again, it was a virtual meeting attended by Jake Sullivan, Secretary of State Antony Blinken, and other top national security officials from the Biden administration. The contentious part grew out of the Israeli officials, including Ron Dermer, a member of the Israeli War Cabinet, sharing details about their humanitarian plan for a potential invasion, ground invasion of Rafa. It includes ideas like trying to evacuate more than 1 million people, upwards of 1.4 million people out of Rafa in just a couple of weeks, and moving them north of Rafa, which has been all but destroyed throughout the course of this conflict, and potentially putting them essentially in camps, in tents. But according to the officials who we spoke with, they said that the Israelis hadn't worked out some of the key details like sanitation, food, and where potentially hundreds of thousands of these tents would come from that these civilians would move into. Now, over the course of the meeting, as the U.S. officials questioned the Israelis, one of them, specifically Ron Dermer, according to the officials we spoke with, became somewhat agitated, waving his arms around as he was defending their humanitarian plan. Now, I should say an Israeli official who was present in the meeting denied the characterization as it being contentious and said, in fact, it was a constructive meeting. But again, what we've learned throughout the course of the reporting on this is these meetings have become more and more tense as they discuss the plans for Rafa, which, according to a number of U.S. officials, the Israelis still have not presented much of an actual war plan or invasion plan. And the U.S. still believes that the idea of how they would tackle this tremendous humanitarian concern about getting these civilians out of the way is still anything but complete, Jose.
Noga, how would you describe the tension between the United States and Israel right now?
I would describe it as pretty bad. For two closely allied countries, it's, I don't want to say a rupture, it's not a rupture. Israel and the United States remain allied and certainly share strategic goals. But between the Biden administration's culture, the way the Biden administration thinks that this conflict should move forward, and sharing Israel's goal of wanting to demolish Hamas, they are crashing into the very culture of Benjamin Netanyahu and his administration that Israelis have been protesting against for now more than a year. And what we just heard is an excellent example. Kind of unfinished plans presented. My understanding is that the Biden administration as it must, is taking seriously Netanyahu's constant promises and threats to invade Rafah. And I think that the reason the plans appear so underbaked is that there really aren't plans, that Netanyahu's threats are mostly for a domestic audience. He's promising his kind of extremist base and ministers that he will invade, but I don't think it's a tangible plan, and that's what we're, clashing.
Yeah, and Ted, I know you met with Dermer while you were in Israel. What do you make of this?
Well, listen, I think the focus on Rafa starts with an acknowledgement that there are still at least 3,000 terrorists in Rafa, probably more than that. That was the number of terrorists who came into Israel on October 7th and committed the worst massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. I think they're right. I'm glad that they're continuing to have these conversations. They're right to focus on how to move forward in order to defeat Hamas and make sure that Hamas plays no role in the governance of Gaza going forward, and that Hamas can never again do what it did on 10/7. They exist. They're an organization that is dedicated to the destruction of Israel and to massacring Jews. That's very clear, and that's the importance of the conversation that's taking place, both between the president and the prime minister, and the conversations that have been ongoing at the highest levels of the national security establishments of both countries.
And Courtney said it was talking about Iran and its role. Is there any fear at the Pentagon that this week's strike on that Iranian compound in Damascus, Syria, could widen the conflict?
Yeah, that fear is not just at the Pentagon. I mean, it extends really throughout all of the agencies here in D.C., the White House, the State Department. There's a tremendous amount of concern that that strike could lead to retaliatory action by Iran. And I think the clearest indication of that is the fact that soon after that strike on Monday in Damascus, on what we're seeing here now, what some are describing as a part of a consular building, or the consulate in Damascus, that killed a number of high-level Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps figures. The concern is that could lead to some retaliation. And the fact that is the Americans reached out directly to Iran to deny any involvement in that strike only hours after it occurred. That right there just shows how concerned the U.S. is about the potential for some retaliation that could draw the U.S. and even the region into it. And Jose, I will say that the concern about, I think there is a tremendous amount of concern that Iran will retaliate. It's just a matter of what that looks like.
And Ted, I mean, what could that look like, and what should the United States and its allies do about this?
Well, listen, I had lunch yesterday with a group of young Israeli soldiers whose job is to shoot down missiles launched coming out of Gaza, coming out of Yemen, coming out of Syria and Iraq, and yes, coming out of Iran. And there are more of them being called up. That's the moment that Israel now faces. What's been made clear here is that Iran is behind all of this through their support of Hamas and through their support of these other terror groups, the 7 fronts that Israel is currently facing, something that is too often, I think, not understood. The United States understands that, and I think is working closely with Israel for the purpose of ensuring the security, not just of Israel, but it's certainly and most importantly, the security of the United States and United States servicemen and women.
And Courtney Kube, Peter Alexander, Noga Tarnopolsky, and Ted Deutch, thank you so much for being with us this morning. Appreciate it.